we're talking grids in this video. So if we're going to talk about making a grid in a plane, a good way to start is to start with one-point perspective. So if we build a plane in one-point perspective, and then we cut it off, okay. So in one-point perspective, the front plane of a box is facing you. So really neither corner is closer to you. In this case, this corner is slightly closer to us. But the point is, we could just put a ruler up to this and measure it, right? So if we wanted to, we could just say, oh look, it's 8 inches. So we could just go, that's half, that's half, that's half, that's a quarter, that's a quarter, that's a quarter, and so on. And then if we wanted to make that into a grid, all we'd have to do is go back to the vanishing point, and at least we would have this one. I'm going to move to two-point perspective because it's more illustrative. But in order to get the grid to work on this line, we're going to have to employ some other things. So let me make some room. And now if we have a two-point perspective box, which I'm just going to do a plane. See what we think of that. How's that look? Is that reasonable? All right, so we know right away that it's not a square. If we wanted it to be a square, it could be up here. But I just want to make some points about how to divide things up into increments. I know I've talked about it in other videos, but those videos were always distracted by some other element. So I want to make sure that we cover it in some detail. So there's two different ways to work out increments in space. And the first one, I'm going to use this part like as if we were going to do a chessboard, or if you were trying to draw like a Monopoly board game and you needed to get 10, because it's 10 places per side. Anyway, let's do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut the big plane in half. And then I'm going to use a ruler just to speed things up. Make sure this is right. And then after a little bit, I won't really need one. Okay, so now we cut it in half, or we drew the X, and that gives us the center. And now if we go back to the vanishing point, let's take our time and get that angle right. I think it's that one. Compare. Yep, the front one should be bigger. Okay, we're on the right track. So we just divided our box in half this way. And it's useful to do it the other way as well. Because when we cut these smaller boxes in half, you won't have to go all the way out. All right, so now we have quarters. I'm just going to concentrate on this span here. But if we're trying to get an even number, this is how you do it. We already have that span there. So we found the middle again. And now we go back to the vanishing point. It's over here. And drag it forward. And we end up with quarters, right? Because if we do the same thing here, we get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we get 1, 2, 3, 4 squares. And so now we can go back to the vanishing point from here. And then take that line and draw it all the way forward. And now we can go and take this and break it into half again. And go back to the vanishing point. And we can keep going if we need to, but I'm just trying to simulate setting up a chessboard. So from the middle, we have, let's see if that's right. Yeah, pretty good. So we have half, and then we have a quarter, and now we have an eighth. If we count these out, 1, 2, there would be 2 here, and there would be 4 here. That makes 8, and that's our chessboard. So if you were drawing a chessboard, first you'd want to make sure that this looks like a square. But then you just do this all the way through, and then carry it out. And it'll go in every direction. It'll be super easy. Now, the other way to set up an increment in a grid is if you need there to be odd numbers of increments. So I'm just going to grab this intersection here. It's relatively random, and draw it back to the vanishing point. Actually, that's halfway, right? Yep. All right, so it's not random. It does kind of relate to that, but I'm going to cut it off in a random place so that we're not tied to this structure over here. And that's pretty good. So I'm going to just randomly choose this angle here. Make sure it goes back to the vanishing point. Okay, so from here to here is our new increment. And as long as we have some recession, it's subtle, but it's there. Okay, so now we cut it in half. With the X first. All right, we don't need this anymore. Go from here back to the vanishing point. Check that. Make sure the front half is bigger than the back half. Okay, so now, remember, this was our new increment, and that's where it's hitting. I think it's a little bit low. That's the center. So we go from the corner to the center, and then watch where it hits this. So we draw that line, and then we just follow this one out. And the new line should be a little smaller, yep, than the first increment because it's further away. So we go from here now to the vanishing point. Now I don't have to, I already have this line here, so I don't have that much to worry about, but draw it out anyway. Make sure it's receding, converging. So now we have our second increment. Here. Okay, and now we already have halfway. So if we go from here to here, just watch it play out. We'll get our third increment. And one of the things to remember is that I'm going through all this process to get the spacing right. If you don't do it this way or this way, getting the recession of scale in space, getting it right is basically impossible. If you do get it right, it'll just be luck. And it might happen once, but it'll never happen again. So there's my third increment. And that's pretty easy, straightforward. You just have to remember to go from the corner to the middle mark. That's a little high. All right? And now, if we go back to the grid here, there's a couple things I want to point out. When you're look at the big grid, and look at this halfway line that we drew here. If we draw this all the way out, and just let it hit the horizon, which is above the page. But remember, go back to this one, draw this out. What happens? It converges with this line on the vanishing point. And the same thing will happen if we did the same thing over here. I just don't have that drawn in. But that's what's going to happen. These other parallel lines will develop inside the grid that'll help you know what's going on. And now the same thing with this one. If we take this line in our first increment and draw it out, now this is kind of unrelated to this, but they'll make their own vanishing points. And then if we draw this one from the second increment, look at that, it does the same thing. Pretty cool. And if we do the third increment, look at that. Looks like I'm a little bit off, but you get the point. Nothing's perfect when you're drawing. It's a matter of getting as close as you possibly can. But you see those parallel lines start to form inside these structures, and if you're doing your increments or your grid or whatever, and you notice that these lines are not receding properly, it means you did something wrong and you probably need to back up a little bit. But I know that this was the least exciting video I'll probably ever make, but there's some useful information in here, and I wanted to isolate it so that you guys weren't distracted by other things while we were talking about it.